So welcome back to the Drive Channel, and I have a new car to test today. Today's car is going to be the BMW 525i Touring. So this is a car that's always kind of interested me. This one I have known since it was new, back in 1992. This is a 92 model year. The family was that owned this, I was very close with, and I was one of the first non-family members to ever ride in this car, in fact. So I have a personal connection with this particular car. I have known it probably as long as I've known any car in my life, probably more than I've known any car in my life currently. Obviously, the interesting thing about this car is not that it's an E34. I've owned one of those before. I had a 535i, but this one is a Touring, which was very rare in the United States. And most of the Tourings that were sold in the 525 were actually not 525s. They were the 530, which had the small V8 engine, 3-liter V8 engine, which was rather problematic. This car is front engine, rear wheel drive, and has the M50 straight 6. And the M50 straight 6 is a very, very reliable engine, which I'll talk about in a minute. But some of the cool things about the Touring is, beyond the fact that us car enthusiasts, for some reason, have decided that wagons are really, really cool, and I'm one of those people, this one has a lot of room in it. Now, the cool thing about the 525i Wagon is that it has almost as much room as your standard SUV. The other thing I like about it is that this one has two-stage opening of the back. So there's a little button on the side just to the right of the license plate, and that'll open up just the glass, and then you have one right in the center underneath the roundel, and that opens up the whole thing. On the sides, you have a side pod with a little button here. This actually has the fluid for the rear wiper, and this one has a little extra room over there. And you have a partition which can scroll up, rather like a sunshade, and obviously the seats fold down. So this car has room that's actually quite comparable to the Land Rover that I have. The E34 was really an interesting car in BMW's history, and it really represented, I always thought the E34 was kind of peak BMW because it represented a lot of the, with the Berlin Wall falling, it represented a lot of the optimism that was felt in Europe at that time, and certainly in Germany, now that it was now just one country. So that's really, I think, what makes this an important vintage car now. And it is really a vintage car if you think about it. It's now 32 years old, this car is. And it's hard to imagine, especially since I knew this car when it was new, so that really makes me feel quite old. But beyond that, but the E34 was really a step forward to the car for the company BMW, not only in terms of styling, but also in terms of technology. One of the things about this car that BMW was very, very proud of, but it never really quite caught on, was the dual sunroof. So this car actually has a sunroof that opens for the rear seat passengers as well as the front seat passengers, and it was a little bit complicated to operate, so it didn't quite catch on. But I still admire the fact that they really put a lot of engineering into it. And this was at a time when a couple of things were also happening beyond walls falling down and that kind of thing. BMW was really on the ascendancy. And so BMW was really taking the fight to Mercedes-Benz in a way that it never did before. So of course everybody's familiar with the W123 wagons. They were quite ubiquitous, particularly in Europe, but even here in the States, a lot of people had the W123 wagons. This car, somebody who ordered this, was truly unique because this was a new thing for BMW, at least in the United States. Now, of course, BMW had Tourings before. They had a 2002 Touring, which was extremely rare. They had the E30 3 Series Touring, which was available in Europe, but was never sold here, despite the fact that the E30 was enormously popular in the United States. And part of the reason why they decided to bring the Touring to the US was because SUVs were on the rise. And I think at the time, in the early 90s, SUVs were growing at about 30% per year. And there was no stopping in sight, and indeed that was the case, right? I mean, even now Ferrari makes an SUV. But this was marketing this in the US was BMW deciding whether or not it made sense for them to either build an SUV or just offer the Wagon now that, and try and sell the fact that the Wagon in a lot of ways was better than an SUV. In fact, later on they made available all-wheel drive. This, of course, is rear-wheel drive. And speaking of rear-wheel drive and the front engine, let's go take a look at the engine. This is the BMW M50 engine, 2.5 liter straight six. Now what's interesting about this, well, first of all, my first impressions of the engine compartment are that it really is aesthetically pleasing. Thing about BMW in the 80s and the 90s, they really focused on having an engine bay that looks good, and I think that this car absolutely nails it in that regard. So another interesting fact about the M50 engine, which you're looking at right now, is that they are known to go upwards of 500,000 miles without a rebuild. Incredibly low stress engine. This does not have the Vanos, which was very problematic. I had an E39 5 Series which had Vanos, and as a result, most of the time that I owned it, the check engine light was on. You will not have that with this car, although it does have its own issues here and there, which I will go over in a later video as to what all of the things that this car needs. But at the moment, there's no check engine lights, and the car just starts up and it goes. Yeah, so the first impressions that you get for a car like this is that this is probably going to be a vintage experience. And why do I say that? Well, first of all, you're surrounded by glass. Everywhere that you look is glass. Now this car, obviously being a wagon, it has not only a C pillar, but it has even a D pillar, and it's very, very thin. You look back and there's almost no blind spots in this car. The other thing too is that this is just for me. When I sit behind the wheel of any German car, whether it's a Porsche or a BMW or a Mercedes-Benz, something about it, it just fits. The car just wraps around you in such a way that is like, it's like it was designed for me. Even though I have a ton of headroom, so if I was 6'8", I could easily fit in this car. And if I was 5 foot, I could also easily fit in this car if I was up to about here. The other thing is, as soon as you put your hand on the steering wheel, you realize, oh, it's a thin steering wheel. And I don't know what it is, but car manufacturers just don't make thin steering wheels anymore. All steering wheels are very thick and they have lots of buttons on them. And the buttons are okay at times, but sometimes you could have too many of them. And I just like the way that this looks with just a pure steering wheel with nothing on it and a nice thin rim. And what's nice about it too is it's a good diameter. So inside the car, when you're sitting, whether you're tall or short, or even if you're leaning over a little bit, I can see every gauge easily with plenty of room around them. So even if you're driving, you can always see the gauges in this car. Other things, there are no screens. So this too makes you feel like, oh, this is going to be a vintage experience here. You have dual zone climate control, left and right, just simple dials, nothing fancy there. And when you redirect the air, it's just a slidey thing with a cable that attaches to a vent someplace. It doesn't even use a vacuum system like modern day cars do. Very, very few buttons here, but all the ones that you need. Obviously you have your fog light here and your headlights over here. And then there's the little dimmer for that. Other impressions that I get, this car, being a 525i, is a bit more Spartan. I used to have an E34 myself. I had a 535i, which I haven't had for over 20 years now. It's hard to imagine it's been that long. But it had wood here and it had a little bit of wood there, and I never really liked BMW's wood. So this car has no wood in it, and I think it's actually aged really, really well. I love the way that this thing looks, and it just looks like a really nice place to spend some time in. The seats are very comfortable. One of the things that in all of the innovations that we've had with cars recently, seats haven't gotten more comfortable. And in fact, in some cases, particularly in sports cars, I think they've actually gotten less comfortable, but you could just spend hours in this seat. I like the fact that you have this little button here to to adjust the mirrors, and it looks like something a fighter pilot would have, because you just use your thumb over here. So that's really the initial impressions that I get when sitting in this car. It's definitely a vintage experience, but in a good way. So anyway, let's now take the car out on the road, and we'll do some driving impressions, and we'll see how we get on down the road. All right, so here I am back in a car made by the Germans. And the first thing you notice when you start out in a car like this one, you have to push the gas pedal down at least a good 4 inches for the car to go anyplace. It kind of makes the car feel a little bit slower than it actually is, but it's just like an old 80s, 90s German car thing. Now this one, yeah, the front is bouncing around quite a bit because it really needs shock absorbers, and yet, despite that, it holds the road remarkably well. So the other thing that you notice about the car is the steering. Now this car has a recirculating ball steering, and there's a lot of haters who say that, well, rack and pinion is the way to go, but I actually happen to like recirculating ball steering. If the Germans use it, it doesn't mean it's bad. In fact, it's usually a good indication that it has a lot of advantages. And you'll feel a little bit of play through the steering, but it actually doesn't impact the car, even from a performance driving standpoint, which may sound kind of surprising. And even despite having shock absorbers that are really, really bad, it definitely holds the road. Yeah. Now the other thing that you'll find with an old car like this one, there are a lot of messages for me that the washer fluid is low. It does actually have washer fluid that's low. I believe that's for the back. It doesn't really say which way, front or back, whether it's low in the front or the back. The other thing is that it's telling me that it's low on coolant, but there's tons of coolant. In fact, if anything, it's probably overfilled. And so that's probably just a bad sensor. The car shifts very smooth because this one happens to have a new transmission. But it really, really is quiet. I wish I could somehow indicate just how quiet it is in here. But with the windows up, you have a nice little hum, a nice sound from the engine, but nothing that's too noisy or too harsh. And again, even with the bad shocks, the ride is actually not bad either. Looking around, you see this wonderful interior, which really has dated remarkably well, but is definitely a vintage feel. This car does not encourage you, and this guy's walking his dog. Okay, we'll just go around you. This car does not encourage you to go particularly fast. However, if you keep your momentum up, you can actually continue on at quite a brisk pace. And yeah, it's just a nice driving position. Another thing I like about this car is that it has these these little armrests here. A lot of cars don't have that anymore. The Land Rover has them, but no other car that I own has these little armrests, and I really like them. Especially on long journeys, you can just kind of rest on there. This 525i has no cup holders. So if you're looking for cup holders, you will not find them in an early 90s BMW. And all the better, in my opinion. This is a car now that it's a vintage car, it's one that you would savor the drive. So you just kind of savor the drive on your way to doing something practical that you could use the back for. The brakes are good. I think that the previous owner must have used metallic pads. I could tell because they bite pretty suddenly. I usually go for ceramic pads, which don't have quite the amount of bite, but they're a little bit easier on the brake rotors. All the gauges look good. They're easy to read, even as you get older and you have poor eyesight. So now push that gas pedal really far down. And you go nowhere fast, but 180 horsepower is not much for a car that weighs this much. I believe, and you can let me know if I'm wrong in the comments, but I believe the Touring is about 100 kilos more than the sedan. So that's a lot of extra heft to pull around. And as I recall, my 535 wasn't exactly blisteringly fast. This has a full liter displacement less, so you're not going to be it's not going to be a torque monster by any stretch, but it's just a lovely place to be. So comfortable in here, so quiet. It'd be nice if the trip computer was working. It happens to not be working at the moment. It works sometimes, and then sometimes it doesn't. So every time it turns itself off, it resets the clock to 12 o'clock, so that's a little bit annoying. Also, I don't have the code for the radio, but most of my drives so far have just been to enjoy the car and not to go long distances. So there you go. That's the BMW 525i Touring. And hopefully you got a little bit of an idea what it's like to drive this car. And I bought this one from the family that owned it, and it's the newest member of my fleet here, and so we'll be doing a little bit more videos on this coming up. So in the meantime, like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.